Yay, there. Finally worked. Okay, let's go. Okay, we're near the bottom of Ois Dalet. I do not believe we finished Ois Dalet, but we're near the bottom of Ois Dalet. Right? On page Chaf. Okay, we're going to start. I made a copy from my book, so you have all of my stuff in here. I apologize for that. But there's a line in front of the word Shemikol, so we'll start that from there. What the Rebbe told us yesterday was that Mishpatim are also ultimately Chukim. Meaning, the true source of every mitzvah is the Ratzon of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Sometimes, in the infinite mercy of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so the Eibishter will allow that Ratzon to descend down and be clothed in intellect, and it might even descend all the way down into human intellect. And you and I call that a mishpat. But, first of all, we have to understand, the Rebbe told us that its real source is the Ratzon of the Eibishter. That's really what it is. It's the Eibishter's will. Yes, of course, it can be understood, but it's the Eibishter's will. And the second part is, of course, that what we understand isn't necessarily the true reason. What the true reason is in infinite intellect, we don't know. We just know how this makes sense to finite, limited intellect. And human intellect itself can understand the distinction between those two. Okay. Shemikol zeh moving. From all of this, it's understood. Shegama mitzvahs the edus mishpatim. Also, the mitzvahs is edus and mishpatim. Edus, holidays, etc. Mishpatim, don't murder, don't steal. Heim kemei chukim legabenu. They are like chukim relative to us. Why? Mikeven shegam tamei mitzvahs, because also the reasons of mitzvahs shemitzad chachmasi yisbarach, that are a result of the wisdom of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, heim lamayla miseichel lenivroim, are beyond the intellect of created beings. So yes, it might resonate in our seichel, but in no way, shape, or form is that necessarily the true reason for the thing. And furthermore, Shehem Ritzeinecha. So now the Rebbe started by telling us they're the Ratzon, but they also might come down into Chachma, but they're Be'ikar Ratzon. And then the Rebbe explained to us even that which we understand isn't necessarily the true understanding. So to speak, we went from above below. Now the Rebbe started the other way. That which we understand isn't necessarily the true reason, and the Ikar is that they're really the Ratzon of the Eibishter. Your will, Ritzeni Yisbarach, the will of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Shalamayla, that is beyond, Gam Michochmasi Yisbarach, is also higher than the Eibishter's wisdom. And if you get annoyed or bothered or nervous, if someone says that there's a level beyond the Kadosh Baruch Hu's Chachma, well, yes, there's a level beyond the Kadosh Baruch Hu's Chachma. There's no level of Chachma beyond the Kadosh Baruch Hu's Chachma, but there's some aspect of reality in the Eibishter that's beyond his Chachma, just like there's something in you that's beyond your Chachma, called your Ratzon, right? That's more powerfully connected to who you really are, right? Okay. So there are things that even, and this is really quite astounding, but okay, the fact that we describe the desire of HaKadosh Baruch Hu to create the world as a taiva, so that means it can't be explained rationally. That's the difference between a Ratzon can usually be explained rationally, right? As a matter of fact, what we've been saying, even though the Rebbe doesn't say it completely here, but there are other places where he does, and we talked about it, every Ratzon of HaKadosh Baruch Hu resonates in Chochmah, even though it might only resonate in Chochmah, but Datzilus. Right? It might not come down further than that, but every aspect of the Eibishter's Ratzon will resonate in Chochmah, because that's the nature of Ratzon. It can generally be explained rationally. So what you want, you can usually explain why it is you want it. Right? Those things that you want that you can't explain, you and I don't call them a Ratzon, we call them a taiva. Right? Have a taiva. Why? I have a taiva. I don't know why I have a taiva. Just have a taiva. It's a really hot day, and you walk inside, and you're all red and schwitzy, and you know, you could certainly use an air conditioner to sit down, and you make yourself a hot cup of tea. And someone asks you, why are you making yourself a hot cup of tea? And you explain, I don't know. The last 10 minutes I was walking home in the heat, and I just had this taiva for a cup of tea. What's more reasonable? A cold glass of water is much more reasonable than a hot cup of tea. And if you wanted a cold glass of water, we could explain that rationally with no problem whatsoever. The hot cup of tea can't really be explained rationally. Why? It's not rational. It's a taiva. I have a taiva for a hot cup of tea. It's not a bad thing necessarily. I mean, that nature of rotzon that can't be explained rationally, we call that taiva. And that's why, interesting enough, the Eibishter's desire for a world, for a dir b'tachtonim, is referred to in Chazal as nit aveh, at a taiva for a dir b'tachtonim. What does that mean, he had a taiva for dir b'tachtonim? That means it can't be explained rationally. By who? Chochmasei Yisbarach can't explain why the Eibishter had a taiva. If you were to ask the highest level of God's chokhmah, why is it that you have a taiva for dir b'tachtonim, there wouldn't be an explanation. It's coming from a place beyond God's chokhmah. Okay, why? It doesn't fit in chokhmah. Right? It's not that there's something. There's no level of chokhmah beyond the Kadosh Baruch Hu's chokhmah. But since there are states of reality beyond chokhmah, so in a Kadosh Baruch Hu there'll be states of reality beyond chokhmah. Just like in you there are. Right? There are things beyond your chokhmah. Right? Things that even rationally you might think it's proper to behave in such a way, but for whatever reason you have some incredibly powerful desire to behave in a way that is the opposite of that. It's not a rational decision. No, it's coming from somewhere inside of you that's very deep that you might not, yourself might not understand. And if it's a negative or destructive trait, so then you might go to someone who's pretty good at unlocking the subconscious, and they'll help you figure out why it is you do this thing that's not in any way, shape, or form rational. Matter of fact, it's irrational. It's the unhealthy thing to do. Why do you do it? And you can say it. You would explain how it's unhealthy, but you still have, you feel like you're in the grips of it. Why? It's coming from some deep place in you that's more powerful than your rational decision. Okay, can you change that? Yeah, I think you can change that. It might need some, normally we ourselves can change those things. Might be something that's so deep and embedded in there that there might be some professional help necessary to undo that thing because it's coming from some trauma or whatever it came from, and I wouldn't even know about that. And there's people who are good at that. I mean, the people who are good at that are really good at that, and they really help people. The people who are bad at that kill people. They destroy them. But the good ones are amazing. They mamish help people. They really do. People have emotional flus, so you go to the doctor. Most of us have emotional colds, right? So you don't have to go to a doctor for a cold, right? You just drink a lot of fluids and wait, and it'll go away. Okay, so you can usually deal with emotional colds. An emotional flu, yeah, even sometimes that can be dealt with yourself. Sometimes you need a doctor for an emotional flu.
Isn't it one of the problems of young people today? It's all because of their parents.
It's probably most people forever. I don't know whether it's just now. But, the fact that almost every president in the United States has been a firstborn male certainly says something about how parents deal with firstborn males. Right? Why would you want to do that to yourself? Well, I guess you've been forced into this position of drivenness that's almost pathological, that you'd want to be who would want to subject themselves to those things that you'd be subjected to as President of the United States? Well, if you have some pathological drive to accomplish and make something of yourself, so I guess that's it, right? That'll do it. Almost every president. There's literally just a few who were not firstborn males. Is Trump the firstborn male? Or was Fred older or younger? No, Fred's the father, right? He had a brother. Has a brother. Younger, older? Do you know?
I think he's older.
He's older?
Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe I'm wrong.
So you see, he breaks every mold, Trump. That's his whole thing. He's the mold breaker. But if you look it up, it's absolutely fascinating. Almost every president was a firstborn son. With all the angst of the firstborn son that you have to accomplish and be and do and all that. Just Shabbos, we were talking about two grandchildren. Our kids were talking about two of their nieces and nephews. There was a niece there who's about 1.5 years, who's the first child and is unbelievably she talks and she does and she goes and she sings and she's just like firstborn child. And they were comparing her to our daughter in Australia. Both of these couples had spent Pesach in Australia helping out our daughter in the last couple of years, comparing to her fifth, who's the same age. I said, well, of course he's not going to be the same, right? He doesn't have people standing over him all day long, sing, talk, do, right? He's just hanging around playing all day without all of the angst of it, Oh, he's not talking, he's not walking. So, yeah, of course he's going to develop more slowly, more normally, right? It's just the way it is, right? He's very cute and very sweet, and he'll know how to talk in the end, but he's a little slower than his cousin who's a little younger, right? Say there, he has less individual attention. Shemikol zeh muven, shegam ha-mitzvahs te'edus u'mishpatim hem k'mei chukim l'gabeinu. They're like chukim relative to us. Why? Because we don't understand the true reason. Skip the brackets. We already read them. V'yaseri mizu, she'hem more further, than him ritzaynecho. Skip the brackets, which you already read. V'zeo demashe yavanim bikshu lavira michukei ritzaynecho, and that which the Greeks wanted to move us away. Michukei ritzaynecho. What does that mean? Hugam b'ha-mitzvahs te'edus u'mishpatim. It also affects the mitzvahs te'edus u'mishpatim. Because what did the Greek want? Ki yavanim bikshu lakar chas v'shalom Yisrael es a-hergesh eloki sheb'mitzvahs. The Greek, and we'll see in Isaiah, the Greek way of thinking is that which wants to lakar, uproot, chas v'shalom, from Yisrael, the sensitivity, hergesh, godly sensitivity should be mitzvahs. That a person shouldn't relate to a mitzvah as a godly act. He should relate to a mitzvah as, okay, say that it's a cultural act, a sociological act. I'm part of a group of people. I grew up in that people, or I didn't grow up as part of those people, but now I've made a decision to become part of those people. That group of people who do this particular behavior, which seems nice and might add meaning to my life. Right, which is very nice. Meaning to life is important and essential. But we don't do mitzvahs to add meaning to our life. We do mitzvahs because God wants us to do mitzvahs. Right? Does it add meaning to our life? Of course, it adds meaning to our life, and that's not the reason to do a mitzvah. Because if that's the reason I'm doing a mitzvah, then the mitzvah is about me and not about God. Right? That doesn't mean it's a bad thing. Right? Just tell you a story when we finish the paragraph. Shekol mitzvahs heim chachmos yisbarach shelamayla miseichel leneshi. All mitzvahs ultimately also come or resonate in the chachma of HaKadosh Baruch Hu shelamayla miseichel leneshi, that's beyond human intellect. Laviram, and that's the idea of laviram michukei, from your chukim. And the second aspect of what the Rebbe has explained in the whole paragraph, bikshu lakar chas v'shalom, and they wanted to uproot chas v'shalom as a hergesh shamitzvah sem ritzoni yisbarach. They wanted to uproot the sensitivity that the mitzvah is the ratzon of HaKadosh Baruch Hu ritzeinecho. So chukei, the Rebbe says, that's the aspect of the mitzvah that's beyond our intellect. Ritzeinecho chukei ritzeinecho is emphasizing the aspect of the mitzvah being the ratzon of the Eibishter. And we talked yesterday about how ratzon is such an important aspect of mitzvah in terms of understanding the godliness of mitzvah and what the mitzvah affords you and I, the opportunity that a mitzvah affords you and I to become, for all intents and purposes, one with the Eibishter, to the extent that we're his hand, we're his arms, we're his mouth, right? Just like your hand is bottled to your ratzon, so your hand can also be bottled to Kadosh Baruch Hu's ratzon and achieve that incredible connection to him, just like your hand has a connection to conscious you can have a connection to the Eibishter. There is definitely a strong component, especially today, of the idea of meaning in mitzvahs, because I think there's a definite feeling amongst anybody who thinks about things that it might be that life in general seems to have lost any meaning, right? That seems to be what people are looking for, is some sort of meaning in life, right? It is interesting. I mean, whether it's though things are changing, I think, a little bit, but it used to be there was a time in Mayanot's history where it was very, very hard for us to get anybody to spend more than a year in Mayanot. Right? There were a few students spent more than a year. Now it's a higher percentage of students will stay for more time. But there was a time when it was extremely difficult to get anybody to stay longer than a year, and most people were coming for 6 months, 8 months. They'd come from September to July or whatever, September to June. So, which is amazing and incredible, and it helps them in their life in an amazing way. But we were wondering, and it's especially, I was having this conversation with a friend of mine who I used to learn with online, and he lives in America, and he and I both ended up in yeshiva about, somewhere close to 50 years ago, and then almost everybody who went to yeshiva in those days spent 4 or 5 years there as a bacher. 3-4 years. Meaning, I remember distinctly when my brother told me my first year in yeshiva, my older brother, who was already married at that point, he had spent 4 years in yeshiva, got married. He said, you're not talking to anybody who isn't a man for the next 4 years. You're going to sit and learn Torah, and after that you'll talk about getting married. That was just move on may love, that you're going to sit for 4 years. It wasn't unusual. And this friend of mine that I was talking with all did the same thing. He went to Morristown in 1978, and he sat there for 4 or 5 years, and he got married, shlichus, whatever. So we were trying to figure out exactly, what changed. Why is that no longer? So, not everything that Marx said is not true, right? That the financial reality affects those sort of things. When he and I went to yeshiva, no one had any havamina that they wouldn't be able to make a living. It wasn't, it was just sort of, okay, we'll figure out how to make a living. No one was worried about that. Now people seem to be worried about that. Does that have to do with the nature of the economy? I don't know. But people seem to be worried about that much more than they were 50 years ago. 50 years ago, people would figure, okay, they'll figure it out. Okay. But also he said something very, very interesting, and I used to learn with him at when did we learn? I think I used to learn with him at 5:30, I think. I think either 5:30 to 6 or 6 to 6:30. It could be 6 to 6:30 because maybe it was. I don't know. It doesn't matter. It was early in the morning, too early in the morning. So it was before mikveh, because I don't remember when I went. Whether I went to mikveh at 6:30, I went to mikveh at 6. I don't remember. It doesn't matter. So. Therefore, I would come to Chassidus after he and I had learned. And one day he said something very interesting. He said that when you went to yeshiva, and this isn't better or worse, it's just different. Well, he said when you went to yeshiva, meaning he was talking about himself also, when we went to yeshiva, he said, so what was almost everybody there looking for? God. That's what people were looking for. They left wherever they were, and they were looking around for God, and they had tried finding him in this place, and in this place, and in this place. Some Jews got stuck there, some Jews got stuck there, and some Jews were lucky enough not to get stuck in those places, and they ended up in yeshiva. Right? Some people got stuck in all sorts of stupid avodah zaras and all sorts of dumb things. I remember going back to Vancouver and having a conversation with my neighbor, who was a wonderful guy and spent 3 years sitting at the feet of some guru in India, and he was explaining to me in his soft voice, right, that Judaism is very good, but Judaism only takes you to this level of godly revelation when you meditate, whereas he can go to this level through his meditation. It's okay, fine. I don't know, it could be. Right, the guy whose feet he sat at had a book written, translated in English. He was a famous guru who was in India. He was in India for a couple of years, and he worked in the hippie bookstore in Vancouver, selling. Where if you wanted to go buy Jewish books, you could get some Martin Buber and Gershom Shalom books. Those are the books that you could get there. Right? That was for you, the shock and Judaism. Remember those books? Right. So that's what you could get there. So he worked in that bookstore. It was a wonderful, wonderful person. I'd be interested every time I mention. I wonder where he is now. But so some people got stuck there, and some people ended up in yeshiva. But what were they all looking for? Everybody was looking for God. That's what they were looking for. So I said, okay, fine, good. So what are people looking for now? So he said something so fascinating. He said they're looking for meaning in life. Because it's just hefker out there. 50 years ago, when we grew up, There was a definite idea as to what life was about. The Western world had a very clear idea as to what the role in life was and what the goals in life should be, etc. There was a whole generation of people who rebelled against those goals, but they were coming from a place where there was a very strong value system. They rejected part of that value system and ended up in ashrams or in yeshivas, right? Lahavdil, right? To the ashram, right? They rejected, but they came from a very strong value system. It was very clear what the values of the culture were. And they just rejected those values and were looking for what they understood to be true values, as opposed to what they understood to be false values. Now I think it might very well be that people are just looking for value. Because there are no values, there is nothing there. There's just an absolute vacuum of, toyu, complete chaos. And someone growing up in that will say, well, there must be some meaning to all this. There has to be some order to all this, and they're trying to find order, which is a different project than looking for truth from one system, trying to find truth in another system, but coming from a system that was very, very clear as to how that system worked. And there's a certain value in growing up in a system that has definite values. There's a certain comfort in that, but that doesn't mean you necessarily accept those values. So there's a whole generation that was questioning those values, and some people ended up going back to them. They got an undergraduate degree in something useless and then went into law, right? I mean, once they decided to bite the bullet and just, get a big house and have 2 cars, the only thing they could do was become lawyers with their undergraduate degree. So they became lawyers, and, that's, right? So they became lawyers and they made a lot of money, right? And some people ended up underpaid rabbis. That's what happened to some people. I have a brother with 2 rabbi brothers. There's 2 of us and a lawyer. And the lawyer's rich. And the 2 of us aren't. And Baruch Hashem, the lawyer's rich. Baruch Hashem, because our mother made it to 101 and my father made it to 101. And my father made a very good living, but it ran out. I mean, it just, he used to say to me at 85, I'd ask him, how you doing, Dad? Great, we're having a blast spending your inheritance. That was his line all the time. We're just having a blast, we're having a great time. But Baruch Hashem, and I mean this, Baruch Hashem, my brother is a tzaddik. He's just taking care of my mother, she hasn't got a clue. He's taking care of her, everything's the way it is, and Baruch Hashem, he's a tzaddik, he's mamash a tzaddik. And Baruch Hashem, she has everything she needs. Because of him, not because of us. We can't afford it. But he can, and he does it. He's not telling a soul. She thinks it's all, My father must be so upset up there in Gan Eden that he did his best. And he's probably upset, I thought I did it. But 101, it's a long time, It's a long time. Things they don't cost what they cost when he made his, when he was working. So he said that people are now looking for a meaningful life, meaning in life. Now, meaning in life you could get in 6 months. You don't need 4 years for meaning in life. To figure out how to connect the truth, you're going to need 4 years. You're going to have to know how to learn a Gemara, Rashi, Tosfos, and Rishonim, and you're going to have to know how to you learn a mimer yourself and teach a mimer. It's going to take a long time to figure it out. Doctors don't figure out how to operate on people in 6 months of medical school. It just doesn't work that way. Okay, but in 6 months, what can I get? Meaning in life. Meaning, I can be wait, wow, this is real stuff. This is true. I'm into it, and now my life has a basis that's healthy and good and proper. Oh, Baruch Hashem. Okay, so I might be able to go home after 6 months with my meaning in my suitcase. I don't mean it in a bad way. I mean a good one. Baruch Hashem. It's incredible. So after he said that, I was quite taken by what he said. I came into Chassidus shir that morning, and I asked everybody sitting at the table, why did you come to Yeshiva? And every single person said I was looking for meaning in life. I was just shocked. I couldn't believe it. So then I told them the story, and they're all going, oh, no, this is terrible. I said, no, it's not terrible. It's what is. It's amazing. It's incredible. But it's just times have changed. Right? Meaning, there was meaning. The culture he and I grew up in, there was meaning to life. There was a clear understanding as to what Western society was about, and this is it. And they weren't questioning that. Then a whole generation grew up and said, I think they're selling us luxury. I don't think it's about the 2 cars and the big garage and the holiday. There's got to be more to this. Right? Okay. Some people tried that and went back to the 2 cars and the big house just because, why not? And other people ended up wherever they ended up selling, books in hippie bookstores or whatever they ended up doing. Right? Shlichus for the Lubavitcher Rebbe somewhere. Who knows? Right? But it was such a fascinating thing. So let's see what the Greek says, because the Greek says you want to be part of some sociological group and some cultural group. It'll work. It's good. Do it. You want to talk about God? Don't be silly. Don't be silly.
Don't be silly.
Silly.
Oh, silly.
Right? I had a student, it was a long time ago, 30 plus years ago. He shouldn't have. This student, it was astounding. He was from, his mom was from. He didn't do it 100%. Gary. So why are we from? I said, I don't know whether I really believe in God, but I looked around at different societies, and Frum society just seems to be the healthiest. So I wanted to bring my kids up in it. Because they don't seem to be, there seem to be less problems with divorce and drugs and, so it just seemed like a healthier society. So I decided, I have to act a certain way to be part of that society. So he said this, this is what he really, and he was been Frum for 2-3 years already. He's married. I talked to him, but I know a couple of years ago, just, said, what's with Gary? This was 30 years ago. Where is he? What's he doing? Frum, Baruch Hashem, brought up a Frum family, lives in, Baltimore or Flatbush. He lives in one of the, Frum Orthodox communities in America. And does he believe in God? I'm not sure. Right? I didn't ask him. I didn't really feel like it was my place to ask him 30 years later. But Baruch Hashem, a couple of married kids. It was fascinating. He was the only person who ever told me that. He was an Egyptologist. He studied Egyptology in college. Fascinating guy. But his chavrusa was this super duper hippie spiritual guy. And the two of them were like yin and yang or something. I don't know. They were completely opposite of each other, these two. And they learned together. They were wonderful chavrusas. And so he went back to wherever he went back. And his chavrusa ended up moving to Tzfas and living in the old city in Tzfas. And I think he still does. I haven't sort of lost track of it. They sort of took different paths. But they were chavrusas. They sat and learned together for over a year. Completely different, the two of them. Okay. Now let's see what the Rebbe says about the Greeks. He says an amazing thing. Ubezeh yuvan, hey, short little paragraph. Bezeh yuvan loshen Gemara. The Gemara says an amazing thing. Kishenichnesu Yavanim lahechel. And we saw this already. When the Yavanim went into the Heichel, what did they do? What was their idea? Timu kol hashmanim shebeheichel. They defiled all of the oils in the Heichel. Now the Rebbe already talked about that. Right? That means a very, very lofty level of holiness. In other words, their level of klipa was so powerful that it was able to overcome temporarily an incredibly powerful level of holiness, etc. Okay, we saw that in the beginning of the Maimer, the power of the Greeks. We also talked about then that we would see the meaning of that now later on in the Maimer. So we've reached that point. So then we have to restate what we said then. That what? Obviously, the Greeks did not understand the idea that the Rebbe is about to say now. They didn't learn Chassidus. So they didn't know what Shemen means and what Heichel means. But, Bashkocha Protis, divine providence, God runs the world. When the Greeks came into the Beis HaMikdash, they did something. God had them act in such a way that they would indicate to us what their true intention was. They wouldn't understand exactly why they were doing what they're doing. They understood what their true intention was. That they definitely understood. Why is it that what they ended up doing was the most powerful expression of that? They wouldn't understand. But they certainly understood what their intentions were. So now we'll see how it is that being Matameh, Shemen Shebeheichel, is the most powerful expression of what the Greeks wanted to do. And it's such an astounding idea. The mashmos haloshenhu, the understanding of this language, shekeshenichnesu laheichel, when they entered the heichel, the 9th level of holiness in the Beis HaMikdash, the 10th being the Kodesh HaKadoshim. The heichel is called Kodesh. Hine, Hishtadlu, they worked very hard. V'nis amtsu, and they expended great effort. Letame es shmonim, for whatever reason, they wanted to be matame the shmonim. And what did they understand that would do? B'chdei, in order l'natzeach chas v'shalom, in order to emerge victorious chas v'shalom as Yisrael, over Yisrael. Why? Ki heichel, what's heichel? Heichel is a hall, a big room. It's a heichel. Heichel hu bina, understanding. Your conscious understanding, the information you have in your head. That's heichel. Your head, which is this space. And what's in that space? All sorts of ideas, all sorts of things that you understand. That's bina. That's the place in which your consciousness begins. Chokhmah is the power of intellect, but Chokhmah is the potential to understand, but in Chokhmah I don't understand, and interesting enough, Chokhmah, there's no me yet. That's why interesting enough, you can't conjugate the verb Chokhmah. You can conjugate any verb, any three-letter root in Lashon HaKodesh can be conjugated just because of the flexibility of the language, but a kal form of Chokhmah doesn't exist. I, wise. There's no such thing, right? I understand, oh, that's Bina. Bina is the beginning of your awareness of yourself. Chokhmah is the source of that, but there's no self yet in Chokhmah. Chokhmah is, that's why Chokhmah is called Bittul. Chokhmah is the ability to understand, but I don't yet understand anything in Chokhmah. Bina is where it comes into a level of understanding, and I can conjugate that. Ani mevin, I understand. There's an I there, and I understand this idea. That's heichel. That's the whole of your conscious reality. It's all in there, in the heichel. Okay, that's what?
I just had never connected that being that Ani mevin, like I just had never connected.
That's why you learn things, Moshe. That's Baruch Hashem. You get up every morning and you learn the Rebbe's Chassidus, and the Rebbe says things that are quite astounding. Right? Some of them I might not even have thought of myself. You know about that. Okay, so what's Shemen? Oh, Shemen u Chochmah. We said that earlier. Shemen is transcendent, right? Floats on top of every liquid, so it represents the notion of transcendent reality. So what's that? L'mayla mi'aseichel de bina, which is beyond the seichel of bina. It's the source of the seichel of bina. But there's no conscious reality there. It's the source of conscious reality, but there's no me yet. That's why I can't conjugate it. Ani something. There's no ani. You can conjugate it. Ani mitchake. Mitchake means to act cleverly, right? Hitchakmut is to, kunsim. Hitchakmut is often used in a negative terms, and someone is sort of cutting ethical corners by acting in a very clever way. Okay, so that's not so positive, right? But the word chokhmah itself there's no simple kal form of the verb. Ani what? There's ani mevin? Absolutely. Because that's where ani starts. I start in bina. The source of I is in chokhmah. So what's shemen shebeheichel? That's chokhmah shebabina. So what's chokhmah shebabina? Bina is what I understand. Chokhmah is the source of that understanding. So chokhmah shebabina is how I process information, how I think. The Greeks are so smart. What did the Greeks know? If I can change the way they think so that they will think like us, then it doesn't matter what they learn. Doesn't matter what they understand. They'll understand it the way we want them to understand it, meaning they'll take the God out of it. If I get them thinking like me, they can sit and learn Torah all day. It won't affect them. They're so smart, the Greeks. It's not like they weren't successful, right? Like we said, there's a Talmud department in every university, every serious university. Hebrew University has a very serious Talmud department. There are people getting PhDs in that Talmud department. They know a lot, but they don't learn it mitzad the elokus of it. They learn it in terms of the intellect of it, and also I assume the cultural importance of it. They're Jews, and they understand they're Jews, and they're learning Talmud. They're not learning, some other text. Assume they're learning Talmud because they're Jewish. Okay. Even though I assume there's some people there who aren't Jewish, but Beseder, and most of them are. Okay, and they have PhDs and they know a lot, and they know a tremendous amount of information. But what's interesting, and it really is interesting, I think it's explainable based on what we just learned, but it's really fascinating if you think about it. There are very, very intelligent, bright, dedicated people doing a PhD in Talmud up there on the hill in Har Tzofim. And they have been sitting there for 10 or 15 years doing this. They know a ton. Not one serious Talmud Chacham has ever emerged from that program. People who know a tremendous amount, but a serious world-class Talmud Chacham. One of those people who knows it like no one else in the world knows it. None. Where do they come from? Yeshivas. Who might have a much less, I'll use the word loosely, sophisticated method of teaching the Talmud they're teaching. Whereas in the university, they might have developed some sort of method of, what you learn and what you learn first and how you learn it, right? Okay. Not one serious world-class Talmud Chacham. Why? There's no alakus in it. So they're learning it like Greeks. So they also don't really understand it, right? Which we learned when did we learn Marga Lefuma the Rava this year? I don't remember.
So it's just learning for wisdom, not for understanding.
No, learning for understanding, not wisdom. It's the other way around, right? It's the other way around. Understanding is me. Wisdom is a place beyond me. Chochma shebabina it's true, meaning they wanted to be matama, the chochma shebabina, but the chochma, you have to get to the bina. The chochma shebabina is the way I think, so that when I understand something, I'll understand it a certain way, in a certain context. Right? And what's lacking? The bittul of chochma. Exactly what's lacking. Right? Is the chochma is ultimately the source of bittul. What's bittul? Nullification to the Eibishter. So that's lacking. But the Greek is so sophisticated, he knows if he can get me to learn it that way, then it doesn't matter what I learn. I could even learn Chassidus. I could learn Chassidus all day, and if I'm just learning it, it's not the intellectual pursuit of, I want to know more information, so then Lav Dafka, it's going to affect me in any way, shape, or form. I just want to know information. Why do I want to know the information? The information is interesting. I'm in a culture that if you know this information, people think more highly of you. Who knows why I want to know the information? Right? As opposed to encountering Elokus by virtue of learning a sugya in Ksuvas or Baba Kama or Sanhedrin, or encountering the Eibishter and learning a Maimar Chassidus, because the Eibishter is in there. But the Eibishter is also in that page in Baba Kama. There's as much Eibishter in the page in Baba Kama as there is in the Chassidus. He's more revealed in the Chassidus. But there's as much Eibishter in Baba Kama. Right? We learned that in the Chanukah Maimer. It's all the same, right? That's what the Maimer, in the Pada B'Shalom Maimer we just finished. All levels of Torah ultimately all the same. What are they? It's all Elokus. Where's the Eibishter? The Eibishter's on that page in Baba Kama. And when you learn Baba Kama right, you'll realize it's all the Eibishter. He's not mentioned once on the whole page. Right? The only thing on the page is a bunch of cows goring each other, a bunch of stupid cows banging into each other. Maybe an ox banging into a cow, and there's a dead baby next to it, and was the baby in the mother? If not in the mother, was the guy have to pay? He has to pay for the baby, doesn't have to pay for the baby. The baby was dead before my ox gored your cow, and you say, no, the baby was in the mother, and you killed the baby too. I want an extra $50. Unbelievable. What's all that? God b'muchash. It's mamish the Eibishter. Tell that to a Greek. Doesn't get it. That doesn't mean he doesn't want to learn it. What did the Rebbe say? Chochmoschem ubinaschem le'enei kol ha'amim. Torah is your wisdom in the eyes of the nations. Okay, so he'll want to know that. Any educated person should know some Talmud. My goodness. I mean, not now, but until 100 years ago, every educated person knew some Talmud. I mean, look at all the interesting questions. In the Gemara itself, all of these interesting non-Jews show up asking fascinating questions of the rabbis in the Gemara. Right? All over the Gemara, there's these interesting questions that they're asking. When was the last time some leader of the non-Jewish world came up to some rabbinic authority and asked them some question about truth? I know, the mayor of New York, when he has a problem, he goes to the oil. Right? That we know. Okay, that's interesting. But he's not, like a serious philosopher. But it's interesting. The philosophers, what are they? They became more Greek over time. I don't know what happened to them. I mean, they just don't think. They don't think we have anything to say. I mean, the Rebbe, everybody came to the Rebbe. I mean, everybody did come to the Rebbe. That is interesting. They all came. Which is interesting. That they all figured out there was something there that they couldn't get anywhere else.
Wait. So this line says, Ki heichal hu bina v'shemen hu chachma shalom alam may hasefo de what is that?
That means that, so what's shemen shebehechel? That means that's chochma shebabina. Bina is what I understand. Chochma shebabina is how I understand. And they wanted to be matame that. Which is brilliant.
They want to tell me the way that you understand things, not to be in a godly way, but to be in a purely
Video. How you think, so to speak. If they have control over how you think, then they'll win. So it doesn't matter what you learn. You'll always think about it in the context of the way they taught you to think about it. So you'll just leave God out of the equation. Even if you're talking about God, you'll leave God out of the equation. It'll just be interesting intellectual information. But it won't have anything to do with your actual real life.
So someone who was put in this state, what's the remedy for it? How does he get out of this?
That's the place above. We still haven't. Rabbi's going to teach us how do you beat the Greek. We all have. This isn't some guy out there. This is some guy in there. Especially growing up in the culture that all of us grew up in, right? We grew up in a Greek culture. Okay, 100%. So that's why Chanukah is such an important holiday for all of us. That's why Yud Kislev is before Chanukah. God has been kind to us. He gave us Chassidus so we can beat the Greeks a week later. I remember going to a lecture of Gershom Sholem. Gershom Sholem was a very, very well-known, and he was the head of the Department of Jewish Mysticism in Hebrew University. He established the department. And the head of the Kabbalah department. There's also all sorts of people up there learning Kabbalah. Very, very serious understanding of the mathematics of it all. And he was the first. He, of course, grew up in Europe and came to Eretz Yisrael and was wrote a bunch of books on Jewish mysticism, etc., etc. But he wasn't Shem Shabbos. So. But he was a well-known character. So he once was speaking in English in Yerushalayim, and it was my first or second year here, and so I was very much limited by who I could go listen to speak. So we a couple of us from Yeshiva decided we want to go say what because we had all read his books when we were in college, and that was looking for some sort of Jewish spiritual experience, which didn't happen in the books. But as much as we wanted it to, it still didn't. But so I was interested to see, what does he have to say? So I went to the lecture, Gershom Sholem. And at some point in the lecture, a young American yeshiva student stood up. No hat and jacket, but from kid, stood up and said, could I ask you a question? I said, yeah. He's from Germany, grew up in Germany. Said, you're teaching all these incredible ideas that are found in the Zohar and found in different places in Jewish mysticism, in the Arizal. Of course, he had a whole theory about when the Zohar was written. It wasn't written by Rashbi, it was written by someone else. Of course, he had to have that theory. Right? and meaning his theory was that someone is quoting the Ramban and writing the Zohar, as opposed to the Ramban quoting the Zohar, which was written 800 years before the Ramban. So how can you're teaching us all these things and yet you're not Shomer Shabbos? How does that work? You could teach us all of the mystical meaning of Shabbos, but you're not Shomer Shabbos. So I'll never forget. I'm so glad I went to this lecture. He said, in that German accent, "You idiot!
Oh my God.
I'm a historian.
Oh,
If I were studying Roman history, should I wear a toga?"
wow.
That's a Greek.
Wow.
That said it all. At this long.
This
Said it all. I'm a
That's
historian. I'm dealing with history of ideas. What are you bothering me with the Shomer Shabbos? What's that got to do with anything? That's the Greek. He lost. Somehow the Greek got his neshama, found the switch, turned it off, and said, "Here, go study this." Wow. Wow. I remember talking to a student who was in Yeshiva here in Yerushalayim, because the same thing can happen in Yeshiva if I'm not careful. A student who was in Yeshiva in Yerushalayim, it was Yud Beis Tammuz for bringing somewhere in the city, and there was a major Yeshiva near that, for Balei Tshuva, near that place where we were for bringing. They used to come fairly often. They'd spend about half an hour, 40 minutes listening. As soon as you started a niggin, they would leave. They were very polite. They wouldn't leave when the rabbi was speaking. So that night I decided, it was Yud Beis Tammuz, we were talking about Mesiras Nefesh. I just talked for about 2.5 hours straight, and these poor guys were held captive. They wouldn't leave. So no nigunim for about 2.5 hours, just straight. So they're all sitting there. I don't know. So one of them came up, who I knew. He got from with Lubavitcher on campus in Boston at BU, Shmuley Posner, and ended up coming to Eretz Yisrael, the Yeshiva. So he came up and he said an amazing thing. He said, everything you said is true. We're talking about Mesiras Nefesh, Beis Tammuz. Everything you said is true. It's just too hard. And I know that if I sit in front of a Gemara all day, I'm doing the right thing. And so I'm just going to sit and learn all day, and then I know I'm doing the right thing. But what you're asking is just, it's too hard what you were talking about. It's like someone took his neshama and turned it off. I'm doing the right thing. I'm okay. I'm covered if I sit and learn Gemara all day. Who told him that? Who told this kid that? Someone told him that. No. That's pretty Greek. Kehechel ubina. Now, obviously, much better than the Greeks, because the guy believes in Torah, he believes in mitzvahs, was doing mitzvahs, right? But it's still somehow something's missing there, right? Kanal Sif Beish, Shemanu Bechinas Kodesh. Let's just finish the paragraph and we'll pick up tomorrow. L'chein timu kol hashmanim shebehechel de bina. They defiled all of the oils in the hechel of bina. Unbelievable! Such an incredible idea. They're so brilliant, the Greeks. Bichdei lahafik chas v'sholem es mezimosam, in order to lahafik mezimosam means to be successful at their a yuzma is an initiative, to be successful at their initiative. Lashkicham terasecha, to make us forget your Torah, not Torah, your Torah, that it's the Eibishter's Torah. Torah, the Jews shouldn't learn Torah. They should learn Torah. Where? In our universities, not in their yeshivas. Right? That's the Greek. And to move them away from the statutes of your will, that we shouldn't be sensitive to the godliness of mitzvahs. Right? If a person isn't sensitive to the godliness of mitzvahs, they should still do mitzvahs. Just do mitzvahs. Just do it. It's good. It's healthy. It's wonderful. Okay, but it would be nice if I also opened up to the godliness of it. Right? And that's certainly what the Greek is trying to stop. That doesn't mean that doing mitzvahs without that understanding doesn't mean I'm doing a mitzvah. I'm doing a mitzvah, Baruch Hashem. We go out in the street and we put tefillin on people. They have unbelievably deep kavanah when they're putting on the tefillin. No, absolutely not. The mitzvah is what matters, 100%. Okay, that being said, obviously in my own life, I would like to have a little sensitivity to what's really going on. Ella And unfortunately, if I don't have that sensitivity, so then it's going to be very hard to pass it on. And we see that that's what happens if we take the godliness out of Judaism, so then it doesn't last, in 2 generations, it's gone. Right? How many Jews are left in the family if there's no elokus in Judaism? It's just cultural. Right? My wife and I were dating. So you know the story, but I'll tell it to you again, just because I'm being filmed and I feel like I'm important. So when we were dating, so near the end, so she went to visit her parents in New York for a month or so, and while she was there, so she saw an article in the New York Times. Her parents used to get the New York Times, and there was an article. Everybody got the New York Times. The people thought it was true. There was an article in the New York Times, which I assume was true. This was probably, it depends. What part of the New York Times did you read? If you read the sports page, so that was true. It's not like the Yankees lost, but they wrote that they won just because people will feel better. Oh, they really lost, but we're going to write Yankees 4, Red Sox 3, even though it was the other way around, because everybody will feel bad if we write the truth. So no, in the sports page, at least they told the truth, so you could read the sports page. I say, I don't know what was going on in the fashion. I don't know. But there was an article about a Reform temple in New York this is 1981, I think. That was celebrate. Don't tell my wife that I don't remember. That was celebrating their 100th anniversary. The temple was opened in 1881 in New York. That's when Germans started moving to New York and opening up Reform temples in New York. It was in Manhattan. What? Yeah. That was like early. So they were celebrating their 100th anniversary, and they wanted to invite back the offspring of the founders of the temple, whose names were on the wall, etc. They couldn't find a Jewish one. Now there are Jewish ones out there, right? There have to be that some girl had a girl. I mean, there have to be, but they couldn't find any Jewish descendants of the people who opened the Reform temple 100 years later. 100 years is not a long time, right? They were gone. Right, okay, so if you take the God out of it, now those people had a temple, they wanted some Jewish identity, obviously, but they took the God out of that Jewish identity. It was going to be a Greek Jewish identity as opposed to a Jewish identity, right? We're going to do all this, not all of it, we're going to do some of this, that part of it makes sense to our intellect, we're going to do that in order to maintain a cultural and sociological connection to this thing that's very important to us, and that's our Jewishness. It's not that they didn't think it was important. They opened a shul when they got to New York, right? That's what they did. And they paid money for it, right? Which is, for a Jew to pay money, they got to think it's an important thing, right? Okay, so they put this shul up in Manhattan, so it couldn't, in those days it was still more expensive than anywhere else. Less expensive than now, but more expensive than down the block. And that shul was in Manhattan. Okay. So they cared about it. But it doesn't last. She's not going to make it. Right? It'll all be mitzad seichel. It makes sense. If it doesn't make sense, I have a hard time with it. I'm not going to find God there. I can't find God with my seichel. That doesn't mean that God doesn't have to resonate in our seichel. Of course he has to resonate in our seichel, but we have to get a level beyond seichel called emunah, which is a power of your soul that is transcendent of seichel. That your emunah, which is a power of the soul, you don't have to get emunah. You have emunah. Every Jew has a power of their soul called emunah, which is coming from the deepest place in their soul, the level in their soul that's connected to the essence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the essence of your soul that's rooted in the essence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That is the source of your emunah. What do I try to do? Not us. What are we trying to do? Bring that emunah, which is superconscious, into conscious reality. Make that part of my conscious reality. Become aware of that part of me. Live in line with that part of me. And what's that part of me that's inseparable from HaKadosh Baruch Hu? Which is, we're going to see. That's Mesiras Nefesh. That's where Mesiras Nefesh comes from. That's what the Chashmonaim were all about. Because the Chashmonaim did something that is absolutely, completely, and totally off the wall rationally. What they decided to do: fight the biggest army in the world with a little band of family members. That was a crazy idea, not normal. If you would ask a Rav, he might paskin that you shouldn't do it because you're committing suicide. But they did it anyway. It's like Pinchas. Right? Mesiras Nefesh. Mesiras Nefesh is coming from a place beyond Chochmah, which means the Chochmah of Torah might say, don't do it. The Rav will tell you, you don't have to do this. But Pinchas did it anyway. The Rav might have told the Hashmonim, you don't have to do this. But they did it anyway. We'll see. That's Vav. We'll go there tomorrow.
Thank you. As faith. Is Emunah sometimes translated as faith?
Yes. But it's a level beyond intellect, not below. Generally, when people talk about faith or belief, they'll say, you don't know that, you only believe that. That statement is contradictory to the Jewish understanding of belief and faith. Faith is a power of your soul that allows you to connect to a level of God that intellect can't touch, because it's beyond intellect. But faith can go there.
Thank you very much.
And we try to bring that down into intellect, so it's part of our conscious reality.
So,
So just 1 second, one more line. Look, Chabad is not about intellect. Chabad is about emunah. But you use Chabad, Chochmah Bina Das, the powers of intellect, to become conscious of emunah. Chabad's about emunah, not intellect. Yeah, sorry.
no, you're